Hi! So I thought it would be kind of fun to do a little like January reading writing wrap up because I've never done that before except on like Twitter in my little thread. So I just wanted to talk about the books that I read in January. I read 5 books, but I'm going to talk about 6 because one set of these books is a series that I've not been able to shut up about. If anybody who follows me on Twitter knows that I've not been able to shut up about it, so you're gonna get an earful about it from me. The first book I want to talk about is The Crimes of Love by the Marquis de Sade. So the thing is, I'm really interested in sex history, particularly obscene literature. So I kind of want to read as much like banned, obscene, pornographic literature from the past as I can. A couple years ago, I read Venus in Furs, which I forget the author's name, but his last name is where we get the word masochism from, and of course, Sade is where we get sadism from. The thing about this one, though, this is a collection of short stories that apparently he wrote while he was in his moralist phase, where he wanted to kind of prove that he wasn't just this pornographer, that he had real convictions and moral things to say, and so it's quite dry. Probably not my best choice as an introduction to Sade. I do have another Sade on my shelf that I think is a little more spicy. So this is, I think, 5 short stories, and honestly the most interesting part about it was the introduction, kind of explaining where he was at this time in his life. He was in prison, as he was in prison most of his life. The stories are very kind of like pseudo-erotic fairy tales, except there's nothing erotic that happens in them. It's just all kind of implied, risque stuff. He really wanted to be like the next Voltaire, and since I can't really remember anything that happened in any of these, I don't think he did a good job, because I remember more of Candide than I remember any of these. The other book, aside from the series, that I read this month was Alone by Admiral Richard E. Byrd. This is the only nonfiction that I read this month. This is a facsimile edition, which is really cool, so you can't really tell, but the text is this like beautiful midnight blue, and that's how it was originally published. So this is a book that he wrote or ghost wrote. It's not, or had ghost written. It's not really clear. About a 1934 expedition to Antarctica where he's the expedition leader. He decided to stay at a newly formed weather station quite far south for the entirety of the polar night to take meteorological observations. And he decided to do it alone because he didn't really think that he could in good conscience ask anybody else to do it. Turned out to be a mistake because due to poor ventilation, he almost died of carbon monoxide poisoning and was incredibly ill for about 2 months before he was rescued. Before the people at the expedition base figured out there was something wrong with him, they disobeyed his orders to come and rescue him. They contrived this whole story about, oh, we're gonna come observe meteors, or we're just gonna happen to pass by your shack. And they ended up finding him, allowing him time to convalesce and get better. His writing is like shockingly beautiful. This is obviously nonfiction, but it is from his point of view. He wrote it himself, and there are some lines in here that just really fucking did it for me. This is sort of a combination of his diary and frame narrative that he's writing. So this is one of my favorite parts of the whole book, was this passage. April 7th. The 6 months day is slowly dying, and the darkness is descending very gently. Even at midday, the sun is only several times its diameter above the horizon. It is cold and dull. At its brightest, it scarcely gives light enough to throw a shadow. A funereal gloom hangs in the twilight sky. This is the period between life and death. This is the way the world will look to the last man when it dies. Like, come on, okay? Anyway, horrifying. Don't recommend being alone in Antarctica in the polar night with no ventilation. So what I really want to talk about now is, so I did not read this year. I read this at the very tail end of December, but this is the first book in a series that has been consuming my entire brain nonstop. And to talk about what I read this month, I have to talk about the first book. So this is The Hands of the Emperor by Victoria Goddard. This is the first book in the LAYS of the Hearth-Fire series. This is my new favorite thing. Maybe my favorite fantasy series world of all time. I read this in December. I had been lusting after this book since about summer of 2021 when a critic that I follow on Twitter discovered it and was singing its praises. But I kind of balked at the price because this is a print-on-demand paperback. It was about 25 bucks. I didn't really want to shell that out at the time. But hearing about it was a big inspiration for the novella that I wrote in 2021, which we'll get to in a minute. So I decided finally this winter to shell out and buy myself a copy, and it was the best thing I've ever done. So this series follows Cleofer Mdang, who is the personal secretary to the emperor of this fantasy world, who goes by various names. The one that Cleofer uses most often in this book is His Radiancy. Essentially, the premise of this book is that His Radiancy is kind of like a god. He's worshipped as a god. There's a million taboos about what you can and can't do around him. You're really not supposed to make eye contact with him. You can't touch him. And it's a very sort of interesting relationship that he and Cleofer have to begin with, because Cleofer is one of the only people who sort of looks at this god king and sees a person. The book starts with Cleofer committing essentially an act of treason by implying to His Radiancy that maybe he needs a vacation. And he ends up essentially renting an Airbnb on an island in his home country, his homeland, and inviting the emperor and some of their friends to have a vacation. And while they are there, the suggestion is made to the emperor that maybe he wants to retire. And it sets off this huge chain of events. But the thing is, this is a high fantasy series, but the stakes are like pretty low. There's no like war, there's no fighting, there's no sword and sorcery. It's just a lot of politics and slow bureaucratic processes as Cleofer and His Radiancy are working to dismantle the empire that they live and work inside and make the government better for the people of this world. One of the plot points in here is that Cleofer achieves universal basic income for his entire world, which is really fun. It's not a perfect book. If I were editing it, there were definitely things that I would have cut down or taken out. But as a whole, just the relationship between Cleofer and His Radiancy is so sweet and beautiful and intense. I cried so many times toward the end. Just the tenderness between them is unmatched. And little did I know, it gets even better in the next couple books. So that's the first book. And then I kind of took a step back and read the prequel, which is a very short novella called Petty Treasons. And this is a novella from His Radiancy's point of view of his first meeting with Cleofer. It's really short and sweet, beautiful, great writing. It's got a really interesting POV style. It kind of fluctuates between second person, first person, and sort of a first person plural, as sort of all these different identities that His Radiancy has are kind of at war with each other. It describes his first meeting with Cleofer, the sort of instant connection between them. They share a joke, which we are never told, but it is the first joke that His Radiancy has been able to tell in God knows how long. Literally over 1,000 years. Time is fucked up in this universe, so it's not clear. And Cleofer answers the joke, and it kind of is the beginning of this beautiful relationship between them. So there's that, you know, it's like, what, like 115 pages, very short. but very necessary context, a really nice introduction to His Radiancy as like a POV character. So then I shifted over into another series that Victoria has written that is tied in with the Lays of the Hearth-Fire. All of her books take place in the same sort of world, and she said that the return of Fitzroy Angersell, is quite important for context. It is. I did not enjoy this nearly as much as the other two or the third one, but it is definitely, you have to read it to fully understand what goes on in the second book in the Lays of the Hearth-Fire. This is from His Radiancy's point of view. This follows him after the end of The Hands of the Emperor, where he is setting off on his quest to find an appropriately magical heir because he intends to abdicate his throne, and he has no children. Fitzroy Angersell is a rebel poet whose works have been banned in the Empire, and he has been magically imprisoned for God knows how long. Cleofer is a big fan, and we do find out quite a bit about him and his deal. And we meet a lot of his friends who formerly made up this sort of renegade band of folk heroes called the Red Company. I didn't love this. I don't think His Radiancy is necessarily a great point of view character. And this just had more, like, not typical fantasy stuff, but like more familiar fantasy tropes and vibes. I was a huge fan of the politics in these, the sort of bureaucracy, how Cleofer and His Radiancy are maneuvering in those systems, how they're changing them and dismantling them. This doesn't have much of that because it is following His Radiancy on his quest, which is very magical. He is a mage. There was some stuff toward the end that really did it for me. That really bumped this up to about 3.5 stars, closer to 4. Oh, by the way, 5 stars, 2 stars, and then these are both 5 stars. This is about 3.5. I will probably continue in this series if Cleofer is in the upcoming books, because he is my favorite. And then the book that I finished yesterday, that I read non-stop for the last week, At the Feet of the Sun, which is the second Lays of the Hearth-Fire. The thing is that Victoria Goddard on her website has an email listed, and I think when I'm done recording, I'm going to email her and just be like, hey bestie, thank you for literally giving me everything I ever wanted in a fantasy book, because I'm not a fantasy girly. This, like, you read The Hands of the Emperor and you think, oh, this relationship with Cleofer and His Radiancy is pretty intense. Nothing compared to what happens in this book between them. This is more, it's kind of like a middle ground between The Hands of the Emperor and The Return of Fitzroy Angersell, in that it is more magical. It has less to do with sort of bureaucracy and systemic change, and has a lot more of a like fairy tale vibe. There's a lot of accidentally tripping and falling into other worlds, which is fun, and is apparently a common occurrence because nobody ever seems too upset about it, which is funny. There's so much more exploration of Cleofer and his culture, which is largely inspired by Pacific Islander culture. The latter half of The Hands of the Emperor is a lot about him sort of reclaiming his cultural identity and bringing that to the palace and demanding respect for himself and for where he comes from. And this book is really a love letter to the world building that Victoria Goddard has done with his culture, and is a lot of His Radiancy showing his appreciation for Cleofer's culture and the growing very special relationship between them both and what that means for them. So essentially the premise of this is that His Radiancy has set off on his quest. He has left Cleofer behind to run the government until he gets back with his heir. But Cleofer is out on a walk one day and gets caught in a landslide and has a horrible concussion and is declared dead for a while. He gets back, essentially, he doesn't have a job anymore. Somebody else is running the government for him. He'd already handed over a lot of his responsibilities, and so he doesn't really have anything to do. So he decides to go in search of a cousin of his who's been missing, and then hopefully to find His Radiancy. which he does, and they all set off on their adventures together, and the relationship between Cleophar and his Radiancy, just like every 3 chapters I was like, surely this is the emotional climax of the book. Oh, surely this is the emotional climax. It just like built and built and built and built, and it was so emotionally satisfying. Everything I wanted out of this relationship, out of this love story. Let's be just frank about it. It's a romance. With The Hands of the Emperor, there are things that I would have cut or I would have edited down. With this, I feel like everything was really cohesive. Every scene kind of built on either plot or character progression. I loved the character development of his Radiancy, specifically watching him kind of discover who he actually is, who he always was, and using Cleophar as kind of his anchor point in this like search for his identity. A couple fun twists that I can tell will be explored in the 3rd book, which I don't know when it's coming out. It'll probably be a couple years. That one is called Common and Ordinary Goods, and it will, I don't know when it'll come out, but there will be other books in the Red Company Reformed series. Hopefully they'll have Cleophar in them. I will read those. If you are looking for a fantastic queer fantasy series with amazing world building and just so warm and sprawling and indulgent and kind, I cannot recommend these books highly enough. She only has like 200 something followers on Twitter. The books are incredibly highly rated on Goodreads, mostly because like hardly anyone has read them, and so there aren't that many reviews, but almost everyone who has read them loves them. I've heard it compared to The Goblin Emperor quite a bit. I haven't read that yet, but I am hoping to get that from the library soon to see what all the fuss is about, because if it's anything like these, I'm gonna love it. So that is me in my fantasy era, by which I mean my 9 Worlds era. So those are the 5-ish books that I read in January and at the end of December. And so now to just talk briefly about writing. So I wrote a novella in November of 2021. It was very unplanned, off the cuff. Like I said, it was, let me just drop all of my books. Inspired partially by the synopsis of this, of a fantasy book with very low stakes that was more focused on interpersonal relationships. That novella is finished, finally, fully edited. I went through about 3 drafts over the course of last year, and just yesterday, my friend Abby, my amazing friend Abby, who has been helping edit, also designed the cover, and she sent me the cover proof. It is everything I could have dreamed. It is beautiful. I'm waiting for the full-size files now so that I can get a proof copy from Amazon. And so hopefully it will be up for publication and purchase at the very beginning of March. I probably could be sooner, but March is sort of around the main character's birthday, so that's what I'm hoping. It is a queer low fantasy romance about 2 characters who met once in their 20s and have not seen each other in 25 years until a mutual tragedy reunites them and gives them the opportunity to explore their feelings for one another in late middle age. I am incredibly fond of it. I'm really proud with how it came out. I am working on a companion novella about 2 minor characters in the first story and their relationship. They are also a pair of middle-aged men. Are you sensing a theme? That is kind of on the back burner while I finish getting everything edited and ready. While I'm waiting for these covers and this proof and everything, I want to kind of put my focus on the upcoming project, and I will get back to the other one once that is out in the world. I do have about 30,000 words in it. It's going great. It's been really nice to work on. Neither of these stories have ever felt stressful to me, which is to work on. I'm always excited to get back to it and get back to the characters, which is new for me, especially because I don't write fantasy. I really had no experience in that genre until this, and it just kind of was kismet and worked out great. I have written novels in the past. They were both total ripoffs of other IP, so I don't really count them anymore as being finished long-form original fiction projects. So this is pretty much the first long-form original fiction piece I've ever finished, and the fact that I think it's worthy of being published is a lot. I'm an editor professionally, so I have very high standards for myself and other people, and I feel good about it, and I am really excited to share it with people, even if it's just a couple people here and there, if it's friends, you know. It just feels good to finish something on that scale and to be able to share it. So that is my January reading and writing. Read these books, please. I want to talk about them with more people. It's driving me insane. There's a Discord server. I'm not good with Discord servers, so I'm alone here with all of my feelings. The 6 or 7 times that I cried over the course of this series, that is my recommendation to you. Those are the books that I read in January, and those are the updates on writing for this month. I don't know what I'm going to read next. I have a little TBR jar that should pick for me. It'll probably pick a nonfiction because they've got like 70 unread nonfictions. So we will see what next month brings. Okay, thanks for watching. Have a good one. Happy reading, happy writing. Bye.